Hi there, this is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer, with another book review. In this video we're discussing Apartment 303, written by Kelli Hawkins. It's a slow burn psychological thriller. Now, slow burn thrillers can be a bit of a worry. If they're not written very well, they can just be terrible stories and letdowns. It all comes down to the writing style, I think, and how the author seeks out to engage the reader into the book. Fortunately, Kelli Hawkins has done a great job in this book. The slow burn elements are well done. The writing's very well done. I was dragged into this story very early on, and it didn't let me go. It's a book where I was forcing myself to stay up very late just to finish it, to find out what happened at the end. That's a sign of a good book. I really enjoyed this story, even though there's some tropes in there. You know, the main character is housebound. She likes to watch things going on through telescopes and binoculars from a window. She has theories that nobody believes. So there's a few tropes in the story. But it seems okay because the story is written so well. The overall story, the writing style, the way the author just keeps you dragging in to the book to find out more. That just allows the tropes to happen, basically. The tropes are there, but you don't mind because the story is written so well. Our main character, Rory, is housebound. Now, I won't go into why she is because it forms a big part of the book. But she basically has OCD, she has PTSD, she has high anxiety, and all those things force her to be housebound. When she does venture out into the outside world, and she does occasionally, she does it in a very controlled manner. So she's picked up by somebody basically at the door to a building. So she lives in an apartment building in the middle of Sydney, in a very small apartment. I won't go into how she gets that apartment, because that also forms a big part of the story. When she ventures out into the outside world, she gets picked up by a car at the door of a building, and then she's driven almost to the door of where she wants to go. But she only ventures out for very specific reasons. So for things like groceries, things like that, she gets delivered. And Rory, even though she's housebound, she's a very engaging character. So being housebound in a thriller is a trope. There are a lot of stories out there, especially stories in the last few years, where the main character is housebound. So even though it's a trope, it feels okay in this story because Rory is very engaging as a character. She's written very well. And things that go on with Rory when she's seeing things outside, and yes, she watches outside with binoculars and telescopes and things like that, another trope. But that's written very well as well. Just what she sees and how that affects her and how it ties into the overall mystery that's going on in this story. It all is written and structured very well. It's very gripping. And I think the author's done a great job in just crafting that plot around this main character. So Rory does work from home. She writes reports for her aunt's PI company, and she has a companion dog called Buster. And I enjoyed Buster in this book. With the interactions between Rory and Buster, Buster actually just feels like a person in the story, a very big character, bigger than what I think the author intended. The mystery starts when a homeless man is murdered across the road from Rory's apartment building. She feels involved because she often watches the homeless people from her house, and she often gives food to them, leftover food from when she cooks. She doesn't give it to them directly. She gives it to them via the doorman to her building, but she feels a link to these homeless people. She feels like she is involved in their lives, and she wants to know what happened to this homeless man, basically. She also thinks that she saw somebody talking to the homeless people that reminds her about something linked to trauma in her past. Now, I won't go into what that trauma is, because if I told you that, it might give away certain things about the book. But seeing a face that could be linked to trauma in her past sends Rory's life into a bit of a spiral, and she starts to think about things from her past, and it triggers certain things. That's key to the story. So it's a very, very tight story in that a lot of the things going on for Rory are very close to home. And I think the author was very clever in making things close to home, but having some distance in the fact that the victim at the start is a homeless person that has no direct link to Rory's life. But soon after that murder, Rory's safe space, her home, doesn't become the safe solitude space that she was used to. So different people end up coming to her door, or different people in her life. The first is a teenage girl in the building. She turns up out of the blue saying she has a package that was delivered to her door by mistake. She basically forces her way into Rory's apartment and Rory's life, and they do become friends, but it's invasion into this safe space that Rory once had. Then Rory gets a new neighbour next door. That's another person who invites himself to her door and also into her life. And then there's another doorman, another security person in the building who's hired because the person she was friends with most, who worked in the building, is retiring. So it's a third person who's new in her life. But other things are happening to Rory. Somebody seems to be invading her personal space, and in very personal ways. And this person knows things that will trigger all the stresses from Rory's past. And we're not sure who this is. Rory has an idea. She thinks it's linked to the person she saw across the road, talking to the homeless people. She thinks it's a face from the past. But how can that be? Because people assume that that face from the past is no longer alive. So it's very, very mysterious and very thrilling in the book, very engaging as well. And it's those slow burn elements and those thrilling elements in the story that really keep you engaged in this book. There are some other big events that happen in the story, and I won't go into them all, or else I won't actually tell you any more of them, because if I do, it's going to give too much of the book away, because they're very impactful. And when I read this book, and when certain things happen in the story, they're the things that made me want to read this book in one sitting, made me keep reading it into the night, because I needed to know what happened at the end. I need to know who's going to be okay at the end and who's not. Very engaging book, very gripping. Rory, the main character, even though she's a bit of a trope character, housebound, watches things from her window with telescope binoculars, that sort of thing, she's constructed in such a good way in this book. She feels very consistent, very real. The author's done a great job in giving us this character despite all the tropes. And I really engaged with Rory. I found her a great character, very gripping, very believable. She just feels like she's made for this book, basically. And the whole book just suits her so well. It just feels like the author crafted the character first and then crafted the plot around the character. Lucinda, who's Rory's aunt, and the main person in Rory's life in the book, she's another good character. She feels very real. And she feels real because she's not perfect. And even the times where she feels a little bit annoyed, where you get a sense that she's annoyed at Rory for certain things, they're the times where, she feels like a real, very real person in real life, because she feels like she's got these little imperfections in her character. She's trying to be super nice and super supportive all the time, but in times she gets a little bit frustrated with certain things that Rory does or says. So Lucinda just feels like a very real person. She is engaging in the story. And I do like the interactions between Lucinda and Rory in this book. They feel very well crafted. And Lucinda just feels like a character as well that suits this book very much. Farah is the teenage girl who befriends Rory. And I like Farah in this book. She has a very good energy. She's always on the go. She doesn't feel like she slows down in the story. And she changes Rory's life. She seems to be that character that encourages Rory to break out of her comfort zone more and more as the story progresses. And without Farah in the book, without Farah's character, without Farah's energy, those changes in Rory would not have made sense. So the author was very clever in including this character in the story, especially being a teenage character. And it's kind of like the energy of youth, the almost innocence of youth, encouraging somebody in their 20s and their mid to late 20s to change their life a little bit, but for the better, to get the courage to force themselves to do something different. And that was quite well done in this story. And I don't know that I've seen that happen in books before. It felt a bit unique to me. I thought Apartment 303 was a really good read. Having a slow burn thriller is always a gamble in my opinion. There's always a risk that it won't work. So much of it comes down to the writing style of the author. How engaging can the author make the story be? Because slow burn thrillers, in their essence, are slower storylines. They don't rely on fast action. They don't rely on big impact scenes all the time. They rely on the slow build-up of tension with the characters. They rely on characters slowly feeling unsafe. They rely on psychological elements in the story rather than things like explosions and people being shot and things like that. So it's a whole different type of story. And in this case, the author did a great job in crafting those slow burn elements in the story and making this book so engaging. It's a book that I wanted to read in one sitting. It kept me up at night to read this book. I rate it a 4 out of 5. I think the book is so well written. I recommend this very much. Thank you to HarperCollins Australia for providing a free e-copy of this book for an honest review. All opinions in this video are my own. On my channel, I do review quite a few thrillers. If you like thrillers, check out my channel and subscribe. There's also a thriller playlist on my channel. It should be on your screen now.